Get to the church blind! Get to the church blind! Go! Now!
I'm Pete Mitchell, and he's Peyton Jones, and you're listening to Hardcore Church Planting, the companion podcast for the Church Planter Podcast and Church Planter Magazine. Each week, we'll bring you interviews from planters who are in the trenches making it happen right now. These active church planters bear it all, share their successes, their failures, and what they'd wish they'd known when they were first starting out. Listen in to discover how God is working in their church plant.
Hey, church planter, I am here for another edition of Hardcore Planting. What? Hardcore Planting? What's my own show? Hardcore Church Planting is the name of my show. Yes, that's why you're here. Okay, you're in the right place. This is Peyton Jones. I am here today with Chris Green, and he is a random church planter, ordinary Joe, man of the world, missionary church planter in Europe, which you're already speaking my love language. You had me at Europe. You had me at church planter. You had me at Chris Green, dang it. So, Chris, welcome on to Hardcore. This is a fun show. I hope you have fun. And, brother, you reached out to me on Twitter, and we chatted a bit, and I was like, man, we got to get you on the podcast. I think one of the directions we're trying to go on this podcast, I have met so many cool people, interesting people, and people that have cool things to say. But part of my dedication to this podcast is I want to bring it back to grassroots, get back in the trenches with church planters actually doing it and hear what God is showing them. So welcome, Chris, to the show.
Hey, man. Thanks to be here. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice, man. Well, hey, this is really cool. You are a missionary in the Netherlands, right? So yeah. I want to, where exactly in the Netherlands?
We're in a village called Bergen. We're about 45 minutes north of Amsterdam. So North Holland is the province that we're in.
Right. And one of the cool things about being there is that nobody actually will own Amsterdam. They're kind of embarrassed of Amsterdam. They're like, oh no, we're not all like that, right? As soon as you go into the country, that's something that they say. You want to elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, well, when we first started talking about coming here with people, so that we got asked, so are you going to Amsterdam or the Netherlands or Holland? And we said, well, yes, that's kind of all the same place. But our perception of what the Netherlands is often Amsterdam because it's such a huge gateway city, like people thinking that New York or Hollywood was what all of America is like. So the Netherlands, it's a really big mix of urban and suburban and rural, all in a land size that's about twice the size of New Jersey. I come from the Northeast, so most densely populated country in Europe, and so much difference culture-wise, even if you go a mile in between villages. So to say that. Yeah, they do make it clear to outsiders it's not all like Amsterdam. It's a lot more rich culture than what you just get if you go to the big city.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. I love the Dutch. So I used to fly through Schiphol every once or twice a year at least, on my way on KLM, Delta when I was a missionary. So 12 years I've been through Amsterdam a million times. Exaggeration, of course, but I love the Dutch, man. They're some of the most hospitable, polite people, and they're just nice. I mean, you go there. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, that, Anne Frank, she was there, the room was there. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff there. I mean, the bicycling culture, a lot of that stuff that's up in Portland, it started there, I mean, the Dutch are cool. Many people don't know that New York was actually originally New Amsterdam, that the Dutch had actually originally colonized, and we could have easily have been a Dutch colony if things had turned out differently.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Now, the Dutch kind of get a bad rap in the rest of the world, again, because everybody judges a lot of the country based on Amsterdam. And, you think of the people, at least in Christian circles, think often of the red light district. And
Right.
I've heard people refer to the Netherlands as Sodom and Gomorrah. And
it's not like that. When you get outside of Amsterdam, it's like anywhere else in Europe.
Yeah. No, it really, the Dutch language is a very direct language. So when Dutch people speak English, they tend to use very direct language. So it comes across abrupt. And so that's kind of why people have gotten a kind of a sense that the Dutch are, I've heard that the Dutch are cold from people, and it's just not true at all.
I don't get that at all. But it's funny. No. I used to play World of Warcraft and Confession Time, and my two remaining friends. I don't think I ever made more than 2 friends playing that game, but they're both Dutch, and so when they and here's the funny thing is the Dutch and the Kiwis, the New Zealanders. They travel the world, man. Those are 2 cultures where they don't stay put. When I was traveling the world, I met Dutch people and Kiwis like nonstop. Yeah. And I quickly formed a picture that Dutch people don't stay put and Kiwis don't stay put. But it's really interesting because, I've really, like I said, I've always gotten along well with them. So you are a missionary here. And okay, so we've talked about, the Netherlands is not the pit of hell. This wasn't a show to, hey, you're in the pit of hell in the red light district. I knew you weren't. But here's the deal. Europe is so much further ahead in its post-Christian, secular, postmodern mindset, post-Christian mindset than America. Yeah. America thinks it's post-Christian. America thinks it's modern, very secular, but it's not. I mean, do you have any statistics about, where religion is at in the Netherlands? Yeah.
No, just first, the way I say it to people back in the States is, it is like Europe is a generation or 2 at least ahead of the direction that the States are going in now. I think where, I haven't lived consistently in the States for 5 years now, but just judging by conversations, I think where America is right now is kind of reacting against Christianity culturally. So it feels a little bit tougher, and it feels, I don't know, a little bit more intense. That moment happened probably, just kind of spitballing it 30 plus years ago, in the Netherlands. It was a very strong Dutch Reformed country. So what you have now is you talk to youth, young adults that have no relationship whatsoever with the church. Maybe their grandparents did. Sometimes their parents did, but you're really starting with a blank slate. And when it comes to the younger generations, and specifically in Northern Europe, that's different as you move more east. So the average percentage of, I'll clarify that, by evangelical Christians in Europe is less than 3%. Mm-hmm. In the Netherlands, we're sitting just under 5% of the population. So it's it's just a whole different atmosphere.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, you're reaching out. There you are, church planting. Tell us a little bit about how you felt called as a missionary to the Netherlands. How did that happen? And then let's talk about what you've been doing.
Yeah. I guess the short version, 2004, that period of my life where I'm really trying to figure out, God, what do you want to do with me? And I'm a 4th generation Christian, 3rd generation pastor on both sides of my family. Wow. So I did not want the family business. I love Jesus, but I wanted to kind of find my own path. But the Lord really that year started just kind of getting a hold of me, and specifically about the church then in the States, but this kind of being stuck in the days gone by and not really recognizing the moment that they're in now and moving forward. Well, the Lord used that developing passion, put that passion there, obviously, and very quickly after I started putting words to that, I came into contact with a missionary who was going to the Netherlands, and I had written this little piece, and she had read this piece, and she said, that's the Netherlands. That's the Netherlands. And so that I kind of got hooked. So what about this that's so beating so strongly in my heart? What is that is happening in the Netherlands? Like, where's the connection? Never really connected that to a personal call for me until about 6 months later, where I still just couldn't shake it. And just felt like talking with some pastors that I trust to kind of speak into my life, and they encouraged me just to pursue it and to see where the Lord leads it. Ended up transferring to a Bible college. It's now North Point Bible College up in Massachusetts. Didn't tell anybody that I was headed to the Netherlands. Just kind of wanted to let the Lord unfold that in His timing, and met a girl. The thing I said I wasn't going to do at Bible college, and come to find out after we'd been friends and had kind of started dating a year before we had met each other at the same time. Actually, the Lord had been speaking to her about going to the Netherlands as well. Wow. So yeah. So that the calling part of it is very core to how we just experience God's leading in everything that we do. And I think once you're over here, and there comes a certain, even though there's a lot of familiar things in Western Europe, it's still not like home. You're still dealing with the unfamiliarity of everything and the disconnection from everything that you know. And so it's constantly revisiting that. I know why I'm here, like what brought me here, but we've been asking ourselves a lot these past few years, why are we still here? What is the Lord doing now? We don't want to stay committed because of something that happened, but it's just that constant searching for today's call. And once we came here, we knew that the Lord was sending us to plant churches, but we didn't have a clue how to do that.
Right.
And so we just we knew that the Lord was going to teach us how to do that once we got here. So we tried to come as like an open book and just kind of see what happened as we went.
There's been such a theme this morning on everything I've done today. I started a 2-hour-long coaching call this morning with church planners, and that was the theme, was being creative. Then I interviewed a guy named Paul J. Pastor today, who will be on another episode of this, and it was all about creativity, and we tied it with mission. And to be honest, a lot of guys are reading books and taking that and applying it to their missional context, and it doesn't work. You can have all these flashy buzzwords and the Lord, I think many times is doing that, saying, why don't you talk to me? Paul walked around Athens with no clue how to reach that city. And he walked around, and God gave him this creative insight. Tell us a little bit about what you learned. How did you learn? Like, what did God start showing you?
Well, I think I hope it doesn't sound arrogant to say it this way or closed-minded, but I do think that the new frontier of missions is secular culture. I think that it's you're out, and it's like this wild land almost, even though it's civilized culture and people are we just love everything about the Netherlands and the people here. But the things that worked somewhere else don't work here.
Right.
So it's kind of forced us back to the core realities of what does it mean to be a Christian in a world, sojourners and exiles, strangers, and what does it then look like to step into a position of leadership, to take leadership in that kind of context and lead other pilgrims and sojourners, and in not only surviving, which I think when the culture started shifting dramatically in the Netherlands, the church was knocked into a survival mode, and a lot of them are still there. So not only leading in the sense of survival, but just this underlying belief that it is the Lord's will for his church to grow, for the gospel to go forward in power. And so how do you give form to that? And so the process of running up against all of our weaknesses and all of the things that we thought would work and don't work, or it's painful at some points, letting go of things and realizing, man, I don't have a clue. But I think
that's when the good stuff happens.
It really is, man. That's when what's that saying? Something like necessity is the something of innovation.
Mother of invention.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you're forced to those creative qualities. Yeah, you really have to lean into thinking outside the box, not because it's cool, but because it's necessary. So we started very early on, and it's I do have to say it's all grace, because the Lord's just been so good, and where we landed and the people he surrounded us with when we landed has been like I attribute everything to the way the Lord has led it. But we started very early with youth outreach centers. So youth was not our thing. Youth ministry, I never thought I was cool enough, or I'm not a life of the party kind of guy. I'm probably, I don't know, but that was like the last thing I want to do. But the Lord just really broke our heart, like gut wrenching, sick feeling brokenness for the situation of youth here. And so we partnered up with some really great people here in the Netherlands, and great church, and launched a youth outreach center. And the story of just how it launched and how much we learned in that process, that would end up defining the way that we approached everything here, and really opened up doors for us to gain insight into the church at large here in our area of the country, at least. Yeah.
That's fantastic, man. That's fantastic. So tell us some stories. What have been some of the things that you've been able to do? Because I mean, I'm just looking at our when we first started talking. You mentioned that you said we and some friends of ours have been pioneering with this idea of extending presence, intentional Christian presence in public spaces. Now, you're speaking my love language with reaching the unreached. Cha-ching.
Cha-ching. Yeah, man. I do have to say, I first started listening to you. I first heard you when you were on Carrie Newhoff's podcast. And when you said missionary in Wales and planting churches among unchurched people, I was hooked. Because that's really been our whole thing.
It's a different animal, isn't it? You try
it really
to.
Is,
I loved how you described your church plant. You mentioned that you guys planted 2 churches last year, 3 more this year, and you and your wife are doing one of those right now. And you said it ain't flashy, but it's movement, which is saying a lot in Europe.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it's and this is the thing that really I had to click with you. There's so much, like you said, there's so much talking about what church planting is, and honestly, it's kind of become kind of sexy to plant a church, and I just
it's sexy to talk about. It's never sexy to do.
There you go. Really. So we It really is just kind of getting out there and making a mess of things, and then finding the good things among all the mess, and then running with that. Obviously we're pursuing excellence and everything, but not being afraid to try. So we've been, since starting with the youth centers and realizing that there's so much that needs to happen. And in this area of the country, there's the only kind of church plants that have happened in the last generations is from church splits or dissatisfaction of some kind. So there's never been a really visionary movement for bringing the gospel to new people and seeing things come up from the ground. And so this thing, the calling extending presence, really has just kind of developed again out of necessity. So it's a little similar to the third spaces idea, where you're it's not your space, it's not just all your space that you're inviting them in, and you're not just going to just to wherever, but you're creating an intentional space that's kind of neutral ground. So for us, though, we kind of had to drill back down to the principle. What does the principle of that look like? And it's the principle belief. The core belief is the Holy Spirit lives inside of us. And I don't see people in the New Testament going to the cities and villages and saying, "Come with us to the synagogue." I see them going and telling them about Jesus himself, and then seeing things happening right where the people are. So we just kind of gave words, a phrase to a very no new idea, but just trying to communicate it, that it's extending the presence of Christ and Christian community with intentionality, so that we become a church of missionaries. And I think that word has been so key in shifting the paradigm, that we are all sent ones, and that God gives gifts to the whole church to send them out, and not even challenging the notion that the gifts that God gives to us are their primary use is for the body, but saying, could it be also that their primary use is out in the world? What's the more consistent pattern that we see in the whole New Testament? And it's the gospel finding expression through spirit empowered lives out in the real world.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the driving force behind everything that we've been doing and are doing now.
Yeah, it's interesting because everything you're saying, it's like my soulmate, right? It's like, you and I would find each other across a crowded room, strike up a conversation and geek out for hours, right?
Yeah, I believe it.
And we would also talk about, the waffles, we would talk about that too. Probably put it over top of our cup of coffee and then eat them and wait for them to turn gooey, which if you haven't been to Holland, you know what I'm talking about. But anyways, all that to say, one of the things I bring up in Reaching the Unreached, and I'm hearing echoes of this teaching, is, and this is why the subtitle is Becoming Raiders of the Lost Art. We've lost the ability as the church to do what you're talking about, because we've lost the ability to penetrate society. We're now about drawing crowds rather than penetrating a community. And the apostles specialize in penetrating that community. And so you in Europe, you're forced to do that. God forces you in the European context to start acting like it's the book of Acts. The reason why is because you can't attract a crowd in the same way that you can in America. You don't have the raw materials to do so. So what happens is God uses that as a way to sanctify us as missionaries and to get us to start. Sorry, my dog's, I don't know if you can hear that. My dog is itching and her collar is jingling. You try to run a professional podcast. You really do. But what happens is that, the post-Christian world, this is kind of why I'm excited about what's happening in America. The post-Christian world, everyone else is panicking. I'm thinking the church has been so sick for so long. Like we haven't evangelized. We've been throwing money and programs and marketing at the culture, thinking that'll bring them in, or, strobe lights and a rock and worship band that sounds like Coldplay 20 years ago. Yeah. No. Nobody's sitting at the bar on the bar stool, turning to their drinking companion and saying, "Hey, did you hear about the worship band going on down at such and such community?" No, I know. We ought to go check it out. They don't care. The thing about Europe is they're not hostile to Christianity because it's not a threat.
No.
In America, it's still enough of a presence where it's a bit of a threat, and that's what you're feeling. But that is a blessing. You're still a presence. But the church, because of its unhealth, doesn't know how to respond to that. And what's going to happen, and this is part of the chapter when I write about Judea, that we're forced out of our comfort. This is what's happening. We're being forced out. So we have to learn to operate like those Jerusalem Christians did in the Judean context. And that's where the church plants happened. Organically. And so that's what I love about talking to you, Chris, is you've embodied exactly what's happened to me and exactly what I think is going to happen to every church planter in American culture eventually. And this is kind of like peering into a crystal ball and saying, here's what's coming, guys. Learn this now before it's too late. Learn it now, because you're going to have to learn what Chris is talking about in a matter of time.
It's such it may sound weird to say, but it's such a gift, I think, what's happening in the States right now. I know it doesn't feel that way, and it feels, that we're suffering the loss of something that we once had, but it's painful when it's being ripped from your hands, but when it's gone, you're so grateful that it's been the most, for me personally, I believe that that the ministry is an expression of my personal relationship with Jesus. It is that close to who I am. I don't think it's, like I said, I told you before, I come from a long line of ministers, and there's a train of thought that says, I need to keep my ministry separate from my personal life. That's not possible anymore, especially in our context. It's really close to home. And what I've found in all this, that, man, this has been the most spiritually rejuvenating time of my life, because I feel like I'm just getting closer to Jesus in this whole process. Like we just read in the church we're planting now, we just went through the parables of Luke, and the one where Jesus sends out the 12. And this idea that just go to the villages. Jesus didn't tell them specifically where to go. He just says, go to the villages and preach the gospel, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers. And I just kind of walk through this idea of, imagine you're one of those disciples and you're just like, okay, where are we going to go? And you get there and you just, what am I going to do? Who am I going to talk to? And Jesus gave us a little bit of instructions. And I don't know. I think that they probably they came to understand Jesus a lot more when they had to step out, just kind of trusting him. And it's just been so, so refreshing. It's tough, man, but it's really nice.
It is. So I just had a Monty Python moment. We said, go to the lepers. I thought you said leopards. So I had a Monty Python moment. Like, what did he say? Blessed are the cheesemakers. What's so special about them? I think he means all dairy producers in general, the theologian in the back, but not to detract from what you're saying. Sorry. It's hard living inside my head sometimes, but, what advice would you give? Cause I love where you went with that dependency on the Holy Spirit, stepping out in faith. Again, it's kind of like you're the living, walking, talking embodiment of reaching the unreached. Cha-ching. But that's what I'm loving about talking to you. When you reached out to me on Twitter, I was like, you hadn't even read the book. And I'm like, this guy's embodying exactly. And again, it's what I want our American church planners to realize is this is what's coming. Like, don't ignore this stuff. It's very important. But what advice would you give to church planners? Could be from anything. And then we'll have our final question and then we'll sign off.
Yeah. I think for me, you did an interview a little bit back, the 1-2-1 Rise.
Oh yeah.
That, I taught that in these last few weeks. And, I think for me personally too, that's been a thing. I don't think you can talk about it or read about it. I think you have to do it.
Yeah.
So, that idea of finding one place and visiting it 2 times a week and finding one person that seems to be a little bit receptive to you personally and just kind of digging into that relationship over the course of time. I think the only way to really to get a taste of what we're talking about is really just to get out there and go to an unlikely place where you can't lean on your title as pastor or church planter. You can't lean on the name of your church. Like, go there as yourself and imagine yourself to be one of those 12 or one of the 72 that Jesus sent out. And just kind of, I don't think we can lead people in a direction we haven't been ourselves. So
that is so key right there. I remember teaching a room full of church planners, and I said to them as their first project, it was a very first week, I said, hey, you have a homework assignment. I need you to go lead someone to Jesus this week.
Yeah.
And they all looked at me like, like, this
scared,
guy's
right?
the devil, like you can't ask that of us. We've been hiding behind theological platitudes about God's sovereignty, and I looked at him and said, what? Let me get this right. You want to plant churches. You want to go transform society. I've read some of your newsletters. You want to go tear it up for Jesus in the city, and you're balking if I ask you to lead one person to Jesus this week?
Yeah.
And what was rad is that, I just wanted them to get out there. I didn't care if they led someone to Jesus. Obviously, that's not something, like Paul said, God alone gives the increase. But what I can control is if I sow, water, and reap. And so here's the deal is one of the guys, you mentioned an unlikely place. He just went to a bus stop cause I had laid down, if you want to reach culture, you serve culture. If you want to reach an individual, you serve them. If you don't have an in, you go serve people, and it happens. And so he went and got a Starbucks traveler, sat on a bus stop, and led a 50-year-old professional African-American guy to Christ who missed his bus twice, went to work late, but knowing Jesus. And the guy came back. It was like sending out the 72. He came back. No one else had led anyone to Christ. No one had done anything, which I knew was kind of typical. But this guy had done something. And he was shocked. He's like, how many more people are low-hanging fruit that I just got to get out there?
It's addicting. It really is addicting. Once you realize, man, if I believe that the Holy Spirit is going in front of me and I'm just there to just kind of to see what God is already doing and try to respond in a moment, and trusting that his word doesn't come back to him void. You're just leaning on all of God's promises that are already there. And then once you actually see him do awesome things and use you for it, I think it's really it's as simple as making yourself available to God to use you in a moment and doing it intentionally. And no, it's just exciting, man.
Amen. Well, hey, I'm sorry we're out of time, Chris, because we could talk to you all day. I may get you back on here and pick some more stuff apart. But our final question is the one that everyone waits for, which you know what's coming. But being that you're in Holland, I have chosen very carefully famous Dutch people, and one that all of our listeners would know. This was tough because, there's Rembrandt, there's others, but if you were to get in a physical fist fight with Corrie ten Boom, who would win?
Oh, come on, man. You can't ask me to hit Corrie ten Boom.
She's big. She's a big lady. She wouldn't live.
Yeah, dude, and she survived the Holocaust. I don't, how can I compare? You know what? I probably would be quicker than her. But
no, it's unfair. You were a dead man before you even stepped into the ring. It's true. No, I'm sorry I did that to you.
Really? Yeah.
It was unfair to me.
I'll accept defeat in that one.
Yeah, I get it. She had one of the best one-liners of her testimony. She would start off, I don't know if you ever heard her speak. She'd start off and she'd say, I accepted Jesus when I was 4. And then she'd pause and she'd say, no, he did not tell me I was too little to believe in him. So that was pretty rad. But Corrie was tough, man. She endured all kinds of things and even lice in her hair. And I don't think we would bother her. I think she know how to deal with this. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I would just kind of lay on the floor and let her just sit on me or something.
Yeah. I think she would stomp you. I think she would go for the stomping maneuver,
She probably would. She didn't mess around.
Maybe a body slam and then a stomp, and I'm thinking she'd have some heavy duty clogs or something, maybe wooden shoes. I don't know.
Could have been,
Stereotype. Not right, I know.
She stitched too. She like embroidered things. So it wouldn't surprise me if she whipped those out and just started like stabbing me or something.
Oh, needles. Oh, dang. Man, you know too much. This is actually a little bit more scary for you than it is for us and our listening audience.
Yeah, it really is, man. Really
I apologize. No nightmares tonight. Okay.
Yeah. I'll do my best.
Anyways, our listener today has been Chris Green. If you want to get in touch with Chris, what would be the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, Chris Green's a hard name to find one person on. I think if you go Chris Green NL, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, just Chris Green NL, and then you should get me there.
NL as in Netherlands.
As in Netherlands, yeah, and no E on the end of green, just like the color.
All right, I dig it, man. Well, thanks for being with us today on Hardcore Church Planting, and Arnold, sign us out.
Remember, if you are called to church planting, go hardcore or go home.
You've been listening to Hardcore Church Planting. Hardcore Church Planting has been brought to you by the Church Planter Podcast and the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the App Store for both Apple and Android devices. If you like this episode, leave us a positive review. If you didn't like this episode, we'll be happy to give you your money back.